I think that actually may be a good place to start. But what's relevant to um, people at the moment is how you um, generate meaning in your life, or uh, when the world seems to be falling apart around you. Because I
Right,
think that this is actually a big challenge for people. Is like we're currently in a huge disruption,
right,
and people are flailing because of that large disruption. So first it was the lockdowns. I'm not going to say it's the virus because I think that the reaction to the virus has actually been much worse than the actual virus and the disruption that it's caused. And now it's the black the Black Lives Matters protest. I even calling it that, I feel
yeah,
sort of dirty because I feel it's just uh, this has been a setup, and that and George Floyd was just the triggering uh, the triggering event, and it could have actually been almost anything. They were just waiting for the right excuse to do this, and the stage was set. And the question already always is like how much of it was like um, a conspiracy or sort of a pre-contemplated event, and how much of it was subconsciously brought about, because this is a big problem of cognition, that you don't know the difference between, like, it's hard to delineate where people's conscious deliberated strategies start and where the underpinning desires and subconscious strategies end.
right. So where are you with that though? Like,
So where am I? Are we talking like the sort of conspiracy side of it? I think that I well, actually, this is a good point because it touches on personal responsibility and how things. So most of the things we set in the action in the world around us, like we do have a profound effect on our environment. Most of what we do to change or tilt our environment in a certain direction, we're not aware of, or we have to work to be consciously aware of. And even then, it's you're not going to be consciously aware of the things that you're doing that are setting that of how these things are connecting to that end, but you can be consciously aware that you're trying to bring about that end. That's where sort of goal planning comes in effect. And um, you're not going to actively connect the dots, but you'll have a feeling, and that's sort of that sort of underlying thing, that these are the right things to do. That's how you actually orient yourself towards some end, right? Is that you set up goals. This is the power of prayer, or the what was it? What is the secret, right?
the
This is
secret.
the juice. Is that uh, the way we work as conscious systems is that we uh, well, yeah, the way we as conscious, like the way we our consciousness works is that a lot is going on under the hood, that you're not in any sort of verbal or visual, like first person experience sense aware of, but it is you are working on changing your behavior and subtly and manipulating the world around you. So I in a very real sense, I think that like this sort of um this insurrection or revolution or whatever you want to call it that's going on right now has been willed into existence. So it may not have been clearly articulated by a lot of people, but I think that it has, um, in a zeitgeist or a collective sense, been willed into existence. And a lot of that has been first like the how how we've been eroding our institutions, but also just the as a result of the lockdowns. Like Scott Adams was talking about the energy levels and how that we had a lot of pent up energy as people have been locked down and all these people are out of work. At the best of the times, riots are usually worst on the weekends because people have to go to work. Well, you have um, the marginally employed have all been laid off for months now,
Right.
right? So you have the people who are, and all the schools are closed,
Right.
and the universities and colleges. So all the young, energetic people have been locked in their homes for months, and a lot of them have told that there's nothing for them to do until September. So they can have a whole summer of rioting, like all the part-time jobs and that people who are marginally or secured. Like what are young people to do with their times? You're telling them to stay home and you've taken away all the responsibility. That's actually what's really key. It's not you've taken away all the responsibility and their power over their own lives. So you've taken away the consequences of their actions, and now they're acting with abandon as a result.
So just on that, and because you were kind of saying like, how much of it might be conscious, unconscious, planned, not planned. That seems pretty. If I put my tinfoil hat on, do you think that it has been manufactured to a certain extent? Like that's the perfect.
Well, I'll give you like a clear example of how how these things are manufactured in a conscious and unconscious way, right? So, uh, uh, so there's this remake of the Shira show, Shira, Princess of Power. I don't
Yes,
know if
yes,
you're
yes.
yes.
Yeah,
I feel like that show is now being appealed to. There's also there's another one like Steven's Universe or something like that. I
I'm
forget
not
what it's
familiar
called.
with that.
Yeah, it's also has this very childish art. But anyway, these shows are now being appealed to as examples of how society can exist once the police are abolished.
Is that right?
Yeah, so they're these yeah, so on Twitter you'll see that people will say, "Oh, the Shira show demonstrates what society could be like without police." So
I guess I'm not familiar
now
enough with that with that show. So like,
yeah, well, I mean, I'm not that familiar with the show either, but I've seen these articles on Twitter, and where I'm going at with this is it like to stay on the topic of the question at hand is like
right,
how much of this is conscious is unconscious. When the author of the show, who's clearly writing this, like she's creating this propaganda. She doesn't like the message of older shows of Western civilization. Like so, she's re-engineering a narrative that suits her vision of the world or how she wants the world to be, and she's doing that consciously.
right,
Uh, so that far that part of it is conscious. So she is in some sense trying to reshape the world in her own image, and that is a conscious part of the plan. But this appeal to abolish the police, I don't think there was any time where she was sitting down and saying, "I'm going to put in this appeal to abolish the police," or "I'm going to like make these references to no cops in the show." 4 years down the line, there's going to be this uprising, and the People's Army is going to require this propaganda piece to know that the police force needs to be abolished. So I need to slide this in here and make sure that we're ready for the Great Revolution, right? Like that's preposterous. So
right.
there's
So I understand that. I guess also
so
the question for me is now we're hearing from a bunch of different sources. So like,
yeah,
how much is that coordinated? How much is that like is that done
but that's
consciously?
that's that's laying the groundwork, right? Like
Right. Okay.
forest fires don't happen overnight. In fact, we generally control forest fires historically with controlled burns.
Right.
Okay, so here's another example of that. So what we do to control forest fires is we actually during the wet season when fires are more controllable, we'll actually set parts of the forest on fire.
Right.
So that burns out the dead growth and the sort of intermittent material that can cause the canopy to catch fire. So that stuff can all be burnt out, and then the forest, um, uh, the large massive forest uncontrollable forest fires won't occur. And this actually happened with this has been somewhat underreported, but an example with the Australian wildfires, which were I think you could say that's a definitely late 2019, early 2020 phenomenon. So it's with all the other disasters, it's sort of gone under the radar. But that was a reflection of a change in policy, right? Of a destruction of an institution, because a lot of these control burns this is what been underreported is for the last, I think it was 12 to 20 years, when municipalities have been trying to do these control burns, organize these control burns in Australia, animal rights groups have stopped them
Right.
because they're saying, oh, the animals live in the woods, the forest. Like, think of the animals.
Right. They think of Bambi and so on. Yeah.
Or birds nests in trees. The birds can't relocate when you set their forest on fire. And and so like they got up in their state, they protest, they make a big deal, and it's easy to capitulate at the time, right? So we
For
won't do
sure.
this burn. We'll postpone it until next season, right?
Right.
It's not that a big deal, and it doesn't, and nothing bad happens that year, right? So and then they use that leverage. They got one municipality to give in as an example for other municipalities to give in, right? And then over the years, and every time you make these micro decisions of, okay, we're not going to have the forest fire burn because it's it's too difficult. It's easier to not stand up to this belligerent vocal minority. It's easier to let them have their way rather than face the confrontation. And we don't feel justified. We've lost our connection to the reason why this forest fire. It sounds hollow to us when we say, "Oh, we need to do this to stop a big fire somewhere in the future." When she's like, they're pointing to this bird's nest and saying, think of the baby birds right now, right?
Right.
They have this visceral connection, and they're saying, oh, so they it's all the reason to postpone it. It's because they're saying, think of the baby birds, and we're having this sort of vague, countering with this sort of vague abstract notion of one day there'll be a forest fire that we have to prevent, and we so we can avoid that. So it's very easy to make those micro decisions for these councils to avoid the confrontation each time,
Right.
sort of move the step back, and that
And if it's
cause
diffused over many municipalities, I get that. You know, like it's
yeah,
like, okay, we'll our municipality we didn't do it, the other didn't do it, but so you diffuse that responsibility amongst all of them, and it's
and then
yeah.
over the years no one does it, and it becomes easier to say we'll put it off, say no every time,
Right. And it just
right?
and how does
And
this
then when the whole country burns down,
right.
no one's responsible, right?
Right.
Or they'll go after that. Apparently some of the kids were set fires with um like there were arsonists who were aggravating the situation. They got some of those arsonists and some got away, but I mean the point was that the arsonists wouldn't have had the power to burn down everything if the institution fire protection, um, fire prevention hadn't been corrupted over time
Right.
by the refusal to defend it, and this slow corruption, right?
Right.
So again, there's the question: was it a part of a conscious plan on the part of the animal rights activists for the whole country to burn? Was it a conscious plan for was that outcome, uh, or was for any of those municipal council boards who just didn't want to get into the confrontation? Are any of them? Is it was it not only the diffused responsibility, but was it there premeditated for this outcome? It was in a sense foreseeable, as many outcomes are though.
Right.
But it's very you can see the rational decision to avoid the confrontation now, and how the rare very large real risk that they were building up um wasn't seemed ephemeral and unearthly, right? So like it seemed like something that wouldn't actually affect them.
Right. So but just going back to kind of the protests. So you're saying that similar to kind of the Australian fires, we have a very similar situation going on right
Absolutely.
now.
Yeah, the erosion of institutions and the micro decisions um, not to avoid the conflict because it's easier at the time. and then the downside to avoiding the conflict doesn't isn't immediately obvious. So there's a long term sort of diffused cost
Right.
to the decision to on the part of the decision tree where it's like don't engage. Whereas, and this is very true of all heroic actions. Like you take we if you take a heroic act and stand up for an institution or something like that, then you're pulling that responsibility and risk onto yourself. But yeah, so I'll say that again because I think it's very important. Is that that's why cowardice is the preferred path in a lot of these situations. Institutional cowardice is the preferred path because the the cost of the cost um of taking the of avoiding confrontation and taking the cowardly path is usually deferred. It's not taken, it's not taken on you because you're not taking responsibility. So it's deferred to, like I said, and it's abstract, right? You're not. It's not clear because it's not like you're going to get fired for relenting to the mob. It's not, and you know that maybe someday the country is going to burn in the fire, but that's pretty far off, or it's hard to measure how far off that is. So it's an abstract risk.
Right. And is that what you're seeing um, with all the kind of governors and I guess more the mayors as well,
Yeah.
where I think this morning, what was it, Seattle? They're not allowed using tear gas and stuff. Like they're
Yeah.
really disarming the police officers and they're siding with these rioters.
Yes.
Is it
And
just the easy path, or is that, and that's
it's
my big
once you're
question. Is it
yeah.
the easy path, or is it more that they're just on the side of these protesters? Like they want to see
What's
the
on the
system.
side? What's the protesters' side?
Go
Like
ahead.
that
What?
like because that's actually a big part of it is when we say they're on their side is they're on the easy path, right? They're on the cowardly path.
Is that it? It's just
Is that
the non-heroic fear
well,
of
both of them
standing.
are on the like their side is the non-heroic path,
Right.
right? That's a big part of collectivism is that they make heroes out of villains, and they uh they make heroes out of villains, and uh they despise or try and tear down true heroism, right? And it's exactly because of this heroism requires this sort of this and to go back like to that idea of the diffused responsibility of cowardice. When you actually make a heroic stance for something, especially something like abstract like an institution, you're calling all that responsibility onto yourself.
Right.
Like you could think of like an act of heroism in this regard is like holding up a torch. Like
Okay.
you're drawing all attention to yourself. Think of how Jordan Peterson became like this lightning rod,
Right. That's right.
right? And that's exactly what happens when you take a heroic stance and again that you could see the pressure on him and why people responded is because he took that heroic stance. People have understand, especially older people who know our historic myths and our well formed religions understand the importance of these heroic stances. But he there was a all he had to do under this. So all you have to do is use the preferred pronouns.
Right.
And like just do the compelled speech. It's not like we're compelling you to do anything really bad, but he's like, no, compelled speech is the line I'm not willing to cross. You cannot use the force of law to compel people to say things,
Right.
right?
So okay. So I'm seeing what you're
And that
saying because
so
he's like the one municipality
yeah,
in your example of the Australian forest fires
yeah.
where it seems like such a small thing,
It
right?
seems like a small thing, and
And it is kind of
it's
a small thing.
it's a small compromise of principles, right?
Right.
Like, but if you compromise this principle, like just like the forest fires, if you don't like, if we don't do the fire prevention, if we don't burn the undergrowth, there'll be a huge forest fire later on. But this year, that forest fire won't happen. The huge forest fire in later on may not even start or occur in our municipality. As I was saying, yes, the same thing with Jordan Peterson. If he had relented, like he would probably wouldn't have been the focal point of the fire, or the person everyone blamed by saying, "Oh, it's because Jordan Peterson didn't hold the line
Right.
that we're now like we're having burning cars and fires everywhere, right? Or we're in a police dictatorship. Wasn't going to be these bad ends that his principled stance is like, no, you cannot use the force of law to compel people to say things that uh act of the defense of conscious was very abstract. So that's the heroic action, and we keep on getting pushed back away from these horror, it making all these exceptions is death of our institutions, death of civility by a thousand cuts, and what they're that's what excess compassion drives people towards.
And because there is this discussion. I think Peter Thiel and Eric Weinstein
Yeah.
talk about this quite a bit. Institutional corruption. So is that where we're at now? Every it's just we're seeing that in a widespread way, and like to me, that seeing the protests and seeing like the reaction from our institutions, that's to me it's putting that kind of corruption on display, and we're seeing it from many different institutions, from kind of government's reaction,
Yeah.
obviously, but to the media, to the military kneeling,
Well,
to cops
here's
kneeling.
the thing, though. No, there's two things going on. I think from the Democratic side of this, who are like, and who aren't the only ones, but who are really dead set down cowardice this cowardice path, right? Is because there's a balance there. Like there's compassion where you're sort of like there's situations where you need to make exceptions to the rules for people, right? And so that can like taking care of a niche interest like that at times can be an act of heroism. Um, but it can also become easy and intoxicating because everyone is like ultimately everyone is an individual, everyone has their own suffering and struggles to deal with. So if you just keep on making exceptions for not necessarily individuals but for small interest groups as well, it becomes easier and the rules become less and less meaningful, and eventually the rule of law completely is lost from the society, but also the institutions are eroded, and that's the path that we're going on right now. But to answer that question, is part of it is it becomes easy and reflective, right? So for an example of that, yesterday or the day before, it's becoming a bit of a blur. The Prime Minister of Canada, after telling the nation, like for months, telling us that we needed to be locked down, uh, conspiring with the NDP, another political party, to effectively suspend Parliament, to suspend his accountability for months because it was too dangerous for the members of Parliament to meet in person and discuss the business of the government and of Canada. He went and joined a, a protest or a demonstration, whatever you want to call it, of possibly thousands of people, and in those people, he bent and took a knee, right? So
Right.
he kneeled to the protesters, and I'm sure that was very easy and something that he felt celebrated for. He relished in it, right? So it becomes easier. Like it because and they jump to it. It becomes very easy to surrender and not take a principled stance on these things, right? And you can see how the people responded to that, right? Like when the same question is posed to them, it almost becomes a condition, right? Like the same question is posed to them as well. Should people be able to gather for the funeral of their friend, like their
Right.
parents who died or someone, right? It's like, oh no, that's too dangerous. But we can organize a mass funeral of 10,000 or 100,000 people for George Floyd, even though most of the people in attendance like never gave two shits about the man while he was alive,
Right.
right? It gets the absurdity of it on so many levels, but it every time the decision to surrender or relent to pander becomes easier, the cowardly path becomes easier. Every time you make one of those little grudging things, it becomes easier next time, right? Because you condition yourself to do that, and the heroic path becomes not only harder, but it also becomes uh, uh what I'm looking for. It becomes detestable, and you can sort of see that in these protests too, right? Where like uh, I don't know if you've seen the videos of the young people trying to clean up the graffiti on monuments and civic buildings. There's a
Yes.
couple of these video clips, and
Right.
then
Well,
and then
just to explain, so they were trying to remove that, but they were getting heckled, right,
yes, heckled by Karens,
by Karens.
right?
Yes.
By Karens. Well, actually, and Karens perform a function in society that's overlooked, right? But it's specifically these Karens who are trying uh, to heckle them and face the graffiti. The graffiti is more important than the society, than the civic institutions,
Right. Right.
right?
So
And so we can live in squalor as long as as long as we're celebrating all these little exceptions to the rules and not the civil society.
right. What a weird religion. Just to, I think it's probably time to wrap up
Okay.
soon.